Welcome to our basketball coaching class presented by Basketball Immersion and Luceo Sports, where we provide a platform for top basketball coaches to dive deep into the details. We are excited to have DePaul assistant coach Brandon Bailey in the basketball coaching class. Before DePaul, Bailey spent 10 years in the Boston Celtics organization, first joining the organization in 2011 as a video coordinator. He spent the 2017-18 and 2018-19 seasons as the head coach of the Maine Red Claws, the organization's G League affiliate. In 2019, Bailey joined Brad Stevens' staff as an assistant coach for the Celtics, a position he held for 2 seasons before working at Ohio State as an assistant coach during the 2023-24 season. A position he held for 2 seasons before working at Ohio State as an assistant coach during the 2023-24 season. Brandon, welcome to the basketball coaching class.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Man, I've loved all the times that you've shared. I've seen some of the stuff, obviously, you've done with others, stuff you did with our community as well. Always really insightful and excited for you to dive into some defensive physicality. Brandon, can you explain a little bit of what you mean by that?
Yeah, I just think, especially at this time of the year with the playoffs, you're going to hear a lot about what kind of adjustments are being made, things of that nature. But I think at the end of the day, and you'll see it in a lot of these clips, like the biggest adjustment you can make is just your overall effort level and physicality. So especially in college, you hear a lot about it, but especially now during the NBA playoffs, a lot of media members will talk about it. But I think in reality, the biggest adjustment that should be made is just your overall effort and physicality.
I love this. I love this topic. Let's dive into the video a little bit and get some insights.
Yeah, so I'm gonna start here. This is a clip of David Adelman, interim head coach for the Denver Nuggets.
Coach, do you feel now that you've seen them twice, the Clippers, and know what they can present, does it make it a little bit easier in a way for the game three that you know some of their strategies and know how to prepare for them?
Yeah, for sure. And I think on the flip side of that is, hey, what worked in game one didn't work in game two for us in certain ways. And we have to take a look at that and not necessarily change everything, but just do it better.
Yeah, so again, just what I just talked about, like immediately, like media sometimes ask about what kind of adjustments need to be made or whatever. To counter that, like you're not going to make some wholesale changes throughout the course of your season, like game to game, especially throughout the series. Like a lot of it's just going to be your overall, okay, we just need to do what we do a little bit better.
Well, I'm glad you
Sure.
spoke to that. I just know that narrative is out there all the time from the media and fans. Oh, we got to make adjustments, got to make adjustments. But the number one adjustment is do it better.
Yeah, absolutely. I think especially right now, like when you get into it, like there might be some changes that you make in terms of lineups, matchups, things like that. But at the end of the day, we have to just do what we do just a little bit better. Van Gundy's talked about this a few times, maybe on your pod or other places where this is a line of thinking where you're as a coach, you're going into it where, hey, number one, we just have to do things a little bit better, harder, more physical. Right. Then, okay, if that's not working, right now we got to change personnel. So maybe that's more like lineups or matchups, right? Things like that. And then it comes down to, okay, maybe we got to change and adjust. And I think a lot of that is evident in even like in all these series, but especially last night when you're watching the Lakers, right? Here's game one against the Lakers versus Minnesota. They just were super passive, not really physical, didn't really embrace the effort factor at all. And like got exposed obviously in this first game, especially later as the game goes on and on. Just passive switches, not impactful at all, not steering these pick and rolls, not getting into the body, being physical on one matchups. And it was very evident where, and then in the first possession of game two last night, the tone was completely flipped, which you'll see here in a second, where now our pickup points are higher, right? We're into the ball more, we're pressuring, we're poking, stabbing at the ball. We're going to steer this. Rui Hachimura is going to steer this pick and roll, physical on the switch up, impact it, right? Chest the drive, which is very evident right from the first possession. that, hey, we may have to change a few things, but the main thing we have to change is our overall physicality and effort level. Same thing. You can't hear it right now, but you can hear them on the broadcast talking, communicating, pointing, switching. Look at this switch, an impactful switch here from Luca. He does this a couple times actually, especially in the first half, just being really physical, impactful. And I think that's just the biggest thing that you can make throughout the course of a game, the course of a series. Hey, some things aren't really working. I think that's the first thing you really have to look at is what's our overall effort level and physicality to make what we want to do work. Same
So
thing
how
goes
much of that do you think in the first game was going into the game and they had a certain scheme that they were trying to play and it wasn't working versus again, like if it seems like it just be more physical, they should have been more physical in the first game. So was that scheme or was that effort?
I think it's more of their effort. Maybe they're playing more to a regular season mentality or mode. I'm not really sure, but like it was very evident that hey, main talking point here was like, hey, we got to get into the body, ball pressure, physicality, communication. Like that has to be our mindset heading into this game if we're going to have a chance.
I
And
love it.
obviously,
It really
work
shows
that
on
way.
these clips how physical they got. Every switch, every cut, every movement was a bump or some type of
Yeah.
connection. What kind of teaching point are you giving players when you're asking them to be physical?
Yeah, so I think that's just the mentality that especially we want to have at DePaul right now is nobody can cross our face without being touched. Like that's the main thing. Like whether we're steering, whether somebody's trying to cut, somebody's trying to come off of a pin down, something like they can't cross our face without us connecting to the body, being physical, and either trying to like steer pick and rolls or fight through getting over the top of screens, something like that. So that's the main mantra that we've talked about. And there's a consequence for everything the offense does. You know, if they want to move a certain way, they can go there, but we're going to be in their way in order to get there. If that makes any sense.
I
You
love
know,
the
so,
phrasing. There's a consequence for everything the offense does. I love that. And you
yeah.
mentioned chesting the drive. Is there some type of verbal phrasing or cue that you give players on, say, chesting cuts or canceling cuts or whatever that may be?
Yeah, I think in terms of getting to the body on cutters,
Yep.
especially in the corner, if there's a visual cue for us, I'd say is just if the ball hits the elbow, there's only really two things that are going to happen there. Obviously, like the big catches it there, it's going to be a corner split or a high split, one of those two things. So like that just okay, the ball hits the elbow here, we've got to get to the body immediately at the elbow or the opposite slot and then the strong side corner because that's what's going to generally going to happen there. And then you can adjust accordingly to like where the ball goes, if that makes any sense.
Yep.
So,
Awesome.
yeah.
Keep going with this video.
Yeah, so same thing here, right? Just the physical steer, switch under, rumble, right? Try to push this catch out again, just the physicality. Like even here, like I think this one's LeBron here, I believe. Good. Get up, pressure the ball, poke at it. Right. He's going to steer it. He's actually going to get beat a little bit on this, right on the baseline here, but his teammate Gabe Vincent's going to be there on the baseline. They're taking a physical right charge at the end. So one of the guys I worked for, Brad Stevens, everybody knows this is one of his things he talked about all the time. So there's three types of defenses, right? One with no physicality, no effort with the system, right? So whatever your defensive system is with no physicality and no effort, right? That's a bad defense, right? That you have. If your team plays with physicality and effort, but doesn't really have a system, it kind of changes from game to game, right? You don't really have a set identity, right? It's really just an average defense. But if you can combine the two, where you're playing with physicality and effort, physicality and force, right? And everybody's on the same page with the system, right? Now you've got a great defense, right? But the main thing in all that stuff is your physicality and effort. That has to be the first thing that goes into anything because that's what makes right your whole defense there. So, like for example, right here is a couple clips with New York versus Tatum. When you're talking about specifically with pick and roll, there's a lot of things that can go wrong, right? The big can't be at the level. Maybe he lets the roll behind him on accident. Maybe he gets beat around the side of him. Maybe the low man, the MIG's not in. Maybe whatever your terminology is, the goalie doesn't X out to the corner. Whatever it is, 90% of those problems can be negated if there's just physicality and force on the basketball, right? All that stuff can be canceled out, gone if the impact of the ball initially is connected and forceful, right? So like here, if you look at this distance between the ball handler and the defender, this is too much space for the ball handler to get downhill and operate, do whatever the heck he wants to do. right? Like this is almost like you'll see here in a second. It's almost like going against managers or coaches, right? It's just too easy for him to operate, right, and get to the rim, right? Same thing here. There's just too much space here in between the defender, right, and the ball handler. Right now, he can operate freely, right, and do whatever the heck he wants to do. Whereas opposed to in this certain situation here, he's going to do what Jim Boylan from the Indiana Pacers, he calls it closing the distance to the hip, right? He's going to take that space and really connect and direct, right? To use a Brad Stevens terminology, connect and direct. He's going to get into the ball and he's going to be super physical. Now, all those issues and problems that you may have had before are negated and taken away because of your physicality, right? And your effort level, right? Same thing here on this next play, right? It's almost identical here. We're going to close the distance to the hip, right? We're going to connect and direct. We're going to get into the ball, right? We're going to fight to square it up, right? Great job of containing the basketball there, right? We're going the other way because of goaltend. You know what? I would say that was more of a drop type coverage, things of that nature. But I'd say the same thing with switching. Like switching, in my opinion, or a lot of people's opinion, is a weapon. To use a guy that was on your podcast a couple of times, like Nick Friedman would say, switching is a weapon, right? If you are allowing the defense or the offense to cross your face without being touched, if you're not steering the screener, right now you're going to create ghost outs, right? Things like that, slip outs and things like that. Like whenever I worked in the NBA, right, or now in college, guys would say, okay, what do you do? How do you defend like a ghost screen? And the mentality of the defense, a physical, impactful, dictating defense, in my opinion, should be, well, there is no ghost if you steer, right? If you're physical, if you're not allowing the offense to move freely, right? They can't cross your face without being touched, right? Then there should not be a ghost. So here's just two examples here on the same play, right? This first one here was Seth Curry, physical, right? Impactful steer. And we'll go back on that. Sorry. Right, so Seth Curry down here on the baseline here, he's going to steer the pick and roll. Nobody crosses your face without being touched. Steer it, slow down the ghost, right, and it's gone. Now, Goran Dragic here doesn't steer, allows the ghost, right, and it creates all the issues there. So,
such a great example there. And maybe for coaches that haven't heard the term used in that way, talk to us about what steer means.
yeah, so if, again, like just the mentality of there has to be a consequence for the offense if they move. Nobody crosses your face without being touched. As soon as the offensive player, the screener sprints to go set a pick and roll, you got to put your two hands on him to slow it down, right? And almost force him to set the screen instead of slipping out of it, right? And ghosting out. You'll see it a lot of times. It's really important to like slow down the screener, make everything really deliberate and forceful to like, there's no gray area. Yo, we are switching this. We're not saying, okay, like, sometimes we're staying on this, we're staying this, we're switching. No, like we are switching this every time, and it puts that onus, that no gray area mentality, right, on the defense to make sure that happens.
I know a common question from high school coaches in particular is, are these going to get called fouls? And I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. My thing to tell people is always, it's only a foul if the official calls it a foul. So how do you help your players understand what level of physicality they can get away with each game?
Yeah, I think with the steering, especially, like I heard that too at both in the Big Ten, right, at Ohio State, and now DePaul at the Big East. I heard that multiple times, like that, hey, this was probably going to get called. And I think we got it called once in each year.
Those
A lot of
points
it
of
is technique.
emphasis don't always get called, I know.
Yeah, yeah. And you can't point out like shove a guy because that's going to get called. That's when we would get called down. We got called down on the Seton Hall game late because we literally just shoved them and guy caught off his balance. Like there's a lot of technique that has to go in with it too. I'm not just saying that it's all just you got to like pound and physical. Like there has to be some level of technique to it. But yeah, it's almost like speeding. Like you're going to speed, say you speed every single time. You're not going to get a ticket for it every single time you speed either.
I love that
Like,
analogy. And there's a certain amount of speeding, even though technically it's against the law, that is obviously permissible and allowed in most
right.
places.
And this year, last year too, like you see a lot, like Duke does it. You'll see it all throughout the playoffs. Yeah, so like the referees will allow it as long as you're not egregious with it, and like shoving guys and throwing to the ground and things of that nature.
Brandon, this is awesome stuff. I love the phrasing. I think that's the value of the sharing from people like yourself. You've been in the women's game where you started as a manager at DePaul. You've been in the NBA. You've been in college, multiple leagues. This is an excellent way to be able to learn terminology and obviously build your resume as well. And it's really impressive what you've done in your time in coaching.
I appreciate it. I've been very fortunate. I worked with a wealth of coaches, like you said, like Doug Bruno, the women's game at DePaul, Doc Rivers, Brad Stevens, Dwayne Casey. I'm gonna miss guys, but even like the Jim Boylan with FIBA, I was fortunate to work with him at USA Basketball, and now Chris Holtman now at Ohio State and DePaul. But I'm remiss to other guys like Micah Shrewsbury, Joe Mazzulla, Jay Larinaga, Jamie Young, Carol Lawson, Scott Morrison, a ton of people I was very fortunate to work with and work under and learn from. And this is not all my ideas. Like, this is stuff that I've learned from the best guys to do it, and I've been very fortunate to learn under them.
I love that, and it's such a brilliant share to be able to approach this topic, and especially as you said, with the NBA playoffs on, that coaches will be able to watch for this, particularly through the NBA playoffs. But as you said, this happens in college, and this can be valuable in high school, wherever level you coach.
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome. Brandon, really appreciate you participating in the basketball coaching class, and thank you for sharing the game with us.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Thanks for watching the basketball coach class. Be sure to like, subscribe, and share. And check out luceosports.com and basketballimmersion.com today.